Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining in. This is episode 1 of the GSD Getting Services Done podcast. And I had the pleasure to have Eric Elia with me. Eric was my boss for a long time at Brightcove, hired me from Endeca to bring some services expertise into a group that was a former product group. And we just really hit it off, and we did lots of great things. So we covered a lot of stuff in this podcast, and I had to cut it short. We have about 2 other really meaty segments that we're going to touch into on a later call. But we got into personality types of services people versus product, not even versus, but just different personality types from that, and product people. Dealing with sales teams and getting people used to the idea of bringing services as a large deal component or something that makes the software product even more valuable. That was a great chunk of stuff. And, we just got into some funny stories and even talked about some topical things like Gronk and the Celtics and Sixers and things like that. So thanks so much for listening. And let's jump in now and listen to what Eric had to say. All right. It looks like we are recording. So Eric, I am here with Eric Elia, a longtime friend and boss of mine for a long time. Eric brought me on to help out with services at Brightcove when he had been there as part of the founding team, and taught me many things, including that there are more than 4 types of cheese in the world. Yeah.
And there was coffee other than Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, you were way like patient zero on the single origin coffee. Matter of fact, I remembered when you brought me to this magical new place in San Francisco called Blue Bottle, but you kind of quizzed me on it beforehand. Like, you were sort of like, do you like coffee? And I'm like, yeah. And you're like, but do you? Like, I felt like there was some feeling out like, I don't want you to embarrass me. Which
I didn't want you to ask for a regular.
A regular, yeah. There's sugar in that, right?
In 2 cups, like they do in Boston, with the styrofoam outside the plastic, so you don't get moisture on your fingers.
They charge you more for that, and now they're having to switch over to no more styrofoam, which is I get it, but it's just I died a little inside. They also removed the donuts from Dunkin's, which is something else, but. The other note on the Blue Bottle thing is, I don't know if you remember this, but like, you were doing something very nice and you brought me this very expensive bag.
I'll never forget it.
Some time of roast, and then you gave it to me. I'm like, oh, thanks so much. And I was just busting stones. This actually never happened. But when Eric came back like a month later, and you were like, hey, how was that coffee? I'm like, oh my God, it was so good. When I mixed it with the hazelnut coffee mate and put it on ice, like, I was the hero in my household. And you're like, I'll never forget. You're like,
but it was
they would not let me buy this if they knew that you were going to do that to it.
They would not let you buy more than a half pound of beans at a time, because if it was more than a half pound of beans, it would go stale because you couldn't consume it in the amount of time.
Yeah.
And now look, Blue Bottle is the Dunkin' of
they're in malls.
Fancy people.
They're in malls. They're in malls. You go to the Coffee Plaza here or whatever it's called now. They're there.
It's over. So over.
So, and as you people are listening, and you might hear, Eric is a master. Were you an English major? Because I was saying you're a master of, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, master of description.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I remembered when I first started at Brightcove, and I had to go find out about some training stuff. And you were like, "Oh, I'm not gonna say his name. Look for this man. He's a ruddy-faced man. He has a nowhere glaze in his eyes."
looks like life has treated him hard.
Oh man, I think you know what we're talking about. So, anyways, which the description will be great. So the topic of today is something we both had a lot of experience on because coincidentally, we've both run services teams for product companies and agencies, or whatever you want to call it. But agency feels very digital to me, but like go build some hard shit. Mm-hmm. Oh, there goes we got the E-tag now. And then we've also had, as they would say in the major leagues, a cup of coffee, single origin preferably, with product teams.
Yes.
Yes. So I really wanted to compare and contrast because I could talk about this topic for hours. But quick, since I noted on all of those, why don't you give me the quick sort of synopsis so people can sort of hear the experience when we're starting to talk about these things.
The quick synopsis of services and
started here. I think I know you.
My quick synopsis.
Yeah,
got it.
I don't even know what happened pre-Comcast, but you were sort of one of the innovators there for getting video online and some other things.
Yeah. I started my career in Silicon Valley at a real high-flying early .com startup called At Home, which was the first broadband ISP. I was on a burgeoning content team, and I had this idea of we started to play around with videos, postage stamp sized video, and we had in-house talent, and I was on a few different videos we did. And then I had the idea of aggregating video from other companies and started to do something on our service that brought some of the best video from different places online. And that really started me on a track for the next now almost 20 years, focused on what has become the streaming and online video category. And then along the way, getting involved with professional services and consulting in helping people with their online video businesses. So At Home led to Comcast, where I kind of bet my career on flash video at the time, which was a crazy idea. Not much anymore, but yeah. And then that led me into the orbit of Macromedia, which was selling flash at the time, and Jeremy Allaire, who was driving the flash video practice at Macromedia as the CTO. And then he had the crazy idea that the TV and movie business would look in the future like the rest of the web. That things would interlink with each other. People would self-publish. People would sell and distribute. There'd be distributed advertising models. Circa 2005, a little bit of a crazy idea. Yeah. And so we started Brightcove, and I left Comcast to help get that off the ground. Was part of the first 10 there, to help create a hybrid kind of consumer B2B business, because we thought that there'd be no way to raise the amount of money required to license content to build an online video business. So we were going to provide tools to the media companies, and in exchange, their video would flow through our systems. We could monetize it. We could help them distribute it. Along the way, a little company called YouTube got started that completely disregarded copyright, almost got sued out of existence. Google saved them at the 11th hour. Rest is history, and Brightcove became a pure B2B company. Yep. I almost left at that time, and the need to create a professional services business came up at the time, and to serve. We then had a pretty large stable of major media customers, Viacom, A&E Networks, Showtime, New York Times, to build their experiences, and that's where we got to know each other. Yep. And that was an amazing time helping these well-known companies build both strategize and build their products. After I left Brightcove, I wanted to get small again, and I surprisingly really enjoyed the consulting side of things. Went small, worked in a consultancy for a while, and our shop got acquired by SoulCycle last year, and in-house doing more kind of strategic business development and partnerships there, with an emphasis on some video stuff. So that's the long-winded summary.
Not long-winded at all. That's fantastic. So it's great. I remember from the outside looking in when Brightcove had started, it was almost like sort of nobody knew what to do, so it was like a shotgun approach. Like, let's try a bunch of different things here and sort of let's see what the net result's going to be. Yeah, I mean, it actually started with a very, very clear. I would say it was a shotgun approach. Let's not call it shotgun. It was strategic in being broad. There we go. And that we didn't know what the businesses would look like in the future around video, but what it looked like was we were trying to create a whole industry in one company, and thought that this could all sit in one place. Yeah. And so it's premium distribution, it's advertising, sales, and a network. It's premium payment and subscriptions, and it's the delivery, the uploading, the content management. So it wound up being like a combination of what Brightcove is today: a little YouTube, a little Hulu, Netflix, Auditude to Mogul, like the ad businesses. Yeah. It was getting those in the mix. We had this amazing team of ad people we brought in, and we're going to build the ad business. Yep. It was a consumer business. That's what I was brought on to run, which was the consumer facing side of things, which became infamous as one of the first places you could see the first Kim Kardashian video. When that amongst we had a lot of interesting discussions behind closed doors about what was acceptable or not. Yes. Versus what makes money or not. Right. Well, my argument, and we're getting off track, which is what we should do in a podcast, is my argument was we had people pushing back that there was some nudity in a video, and the Kim one obviously had more than that, but there were not that I had to watch it for work, right, of course. And but we were courting HBO and Showtime as well as Playboy at the time. HBO had some very graphic programming at the time, and they still do today. And my argument was that we could not choose our partners or accept content based on the size of the client. We had to have an even policy that we enforced equally, and that if we were going to take HBO on as a customer, Showtime, that we had to treat other smaller customers equally. And so we had to develop a policy and how we're going to react to things, how we're going to deal with takedowns. Yep. When we got some bad stuff, as Andy, our chief counsel at the time, would say, that was beyond the pale. And we removed certain things promptly. Yep. I remember there was something that had some violence in it, and we didn't know whether it was faked or real. Right. And so, pulled that down immediately. But yeah, anyway. No, that's actually a good transition now, because you talked about running that sort of consumer business, and then, the whole YouTube thing happened and everything. And then sort of it was like, the way you described it to me is like, we have this team, they're awesome. And we charged a customer to do some work and thought maybe there's some more to it. Right. And, and then, I really wanted to get into this whole personality type of the professional service, employee, worker, whatever, hustler, versus sort of the product people. Because I know it's always been on my mind since I've been in professional services. And I know, like, even when you were interviewing me, this was a hot topic for you. You were like, you drive by, Google at night and the lights are on and there's cars in the parking lot. I'm like, all right, we don't have a parking lot here at Brightcove. We're right in the middle of the city. But anyway. I would say the hiring principles go almost across the board, whether it was services or not. But I think, as I've matured, I think it's less important about having the lights on in the parking lot and being present, and about
and it's about care and working smart. So the care is you put everything you have into your work, and you pursue the goals that have been set forth for you against the deadlines that you have, and try to be as efficient as possible, and that you do that in a dedicated fashion, and you don't waste time on things that you shouldn't waste time on. And I think the difference between a product team and then a services team is you're tracking the success on a services team really down to the hour at that point, and people's jobs depend on it at that point, and whether you're going to keep the lights on. And in a product company, you're subsidized to some extent, but you still have those metrics overall. At a services company, whether it's bootstrapped or larger, you're truly keeping the lights on, and your headcount is tied to that margin. And if you're underwater, guess what? You're reducing your size of your team next quarter. And if you're above water, you can grow in interesting ways, and whether that's increasing a pipeline or investing in your team or building resellable packaged products internally as well. But a characteristic that I found that was different in services, because your engineers are really at the front line with clients, is empathy and communication.
Absolutely.
And in any category, you see engineers who speak English and can communicate do better than others. But I remember there were a few people in particular who could be in a room with a CTO at a big company who were young at the time. I'm thinking, obviously, I'm thinking Jesse in particular, who he was in the room with the head of product at the New York Times and could go toe to toe with them.
Or Nat, who's telling the guy who runs music for you that he's an idiot.
Yeah, that's a stupid logo. Yeah, that was so. Well, we could do an episode on that, but and so I think that communication becomes ultra important, and as well, because those people are at the front lines. And if you get people who can't communicate with the client, then it's on project management, it's on account management, and it's an extra burden. I mean, it's not efficient, right? Because then you've got the game of telephone, where the engineer's not in the line of communication. But as I've gotten older and experienced, I think the efficiency is super important as well. And so the people who are going to be dedicated. I remember there was a guy who was reading the newspaper at work in the morning when we came in, and I remember we were so busy at the time as a whole, and it just pissed me off. And we had to have a conversation. It's not, when everyone's running around crazy, and you're depending on everyone, wake up an hour earlier at home and read that paper.
And just doing activities like that, knowing that your coworkers are crazy and trying to do stuff, it's not beneficial for the team. And during this time, for people that don't know, we're all sitting at one table basically, right? I mean, there was one table, and then on the other side of the table was a product team. That was pretty much didn't get that checked in, we'll do in the next sprint. But our customers are pretty much we'd start a project, their ad teams that would sell. And so we're talking about let's watch 24 on Fox online because I missed it and didn't set my TiVo at the time, right? Let's catch up TV. And so, okay, this is going to be live. Great. We're going to sell ads to it. We already knew the ads were sold to it, because we're working on the ads and ad integrations and everything. So there's no pushing the dates, right? Somebody says Feb 25, it's Feb 25. And that was also one of those huge things that I noticed on the services versus the product. Is there's no pushing a sprint and this and that. If unfortunately you don't get it done during the week, it gets done on the weekend. But they don't mind, because there is that general feeling as in, I built something that's worthwhile, it's going to be used. It's a little bit of a struggle sometimes, but we got it done along the way, and here we are. So and if you look, we talked about Jesse,
I agree.
super successful.
Yeah, and I think that the work hard, play hard sort of thing carries over, in that the other side of services is sometimes you have lulls, right? And like, I remember it might've been Showtime. Like, I forget who it was, but we had a big launch and it was very gratifying. And then we took the Friday off and we went and saw the first Iron Man movie and went to a really fun lunch in downtown Boston.
Yeah.
And it was great. And the product team, didn't have time to do that. And then at times, but we earned that time because we did what we took to get it there. But I did remember there was an engineer we let go in those early days.
Yep.
I think, I don't know if you may have predated you. Oh, you were there when we were there. Yeah. And I remember he would leave at like 5:01 every day. And there was a Friday and we had to get out something for a big client. And I think it was only going to take like another hour or two.
Yeah.
And he left.
Yep.
And we had to tell the client we missed our deadline.
Yeah.
And that was it for him. But that was the lack of dedication that you're talking about.
Yeah. And, sometimes that just goes into like, I'm sure you'd be fine in this type of environment. It's just not what we need for a services-based thing. And, one thing to tie it back into the professional services team for a products team, trying not to swear too much, but like I always say, don't F with the revenue, right? We are building, in this case, experiences that gets the customer satisfied, and it's very hard for them to untangle us from their main lines of business for video. So we don't want to mess with that, right? We don't want to mess with them wanting to continue to be able to use our service and renew it, our SaaS-based service, which is the central point or focus of this application. But you could be replaced. So you want to make sure that you don't mess with the revenue, and you have to please the customer a little bit more, because there are times when it's in a straight services thing where you can just be like, you're wrong. We're not going to do that. We're going to have to push the dates X, Y, and Z. But, I think we touched on it a little bit, maybe a little bit later in the agenda, but we can get into it now. We're dealing with sales, and we're dealing with, account revenue and renewals and things like that. Maybe now is a good time to sort of talk about how that can influence how we have to work as professional services members, versus sort of in the agency world where it's like, I'm sorry, but we have to push our dates, which can have other effects with like not getting work renewed, but.
Yeah, I think going into it, one of the most important things is knowing what your goals and metrics are as the services organization. Mm-hmm. And the number one goal in the early days of ProServe at Brightcove was actually customer retention and satisfaction.
Yeah, 100% satisfaction, right? 100% referenceability. That's what it was, right?
And the revenue was an important part, but it came second.
Yeah.
And so we were using services as a hook to build the satisfaction and make sure the build outs were successful from our clients, because a lot of times we would sell the product, they'd implement it poorly, and then they would judge the performance based on the product as opposed to the execution and implementation.
Right.
And so we were trying to hedge against that, and then we had clients asking for it. Also at the time, as kind of the SaaS category was maturing, it was very common for a SaaS business to have a percentage of revenue that came from services. Mm-hmm. And as Brightcove was looking at getting its financials in order for an IPO in the future, like having that line of revenue was an important piece to have in the portfolio. So,
but as I was reminded later, but not to be too high. Like as soon as we hit, you cannot be 30% unless it was a bad quarter. And then it was like, oh, maybe you should go out and sell some stuff right now. Right?
Sell something that we can call product.
Right.
It was, I think our cap was trying to be about 10%. So, Brightcove getting to like 125 million in revenue, something like that. We were trying to get to like a 10 million run rate, something like that. But the services dynamic was very interesting, and there were a lot of run-ins with sales and account management people. I remember there was this one, no offense, but total like Boston guy with the double
No.
the double Dunkin' Donuts
No
and
offense taken. Yeah.
the faded Red Sox hat in the office with the thick accent. Not I know it's not close to home
Straight
at
out of Charleston.
all. But and I remember he was like that Eric Elia, he's a effing prima donna. He's like getting on the phone and telling the client, that they got to have this and they got to have that. And I was holding our ground to protect services to
Right.
make sure that we were not signed up for a date or a set of deliverables that was not possible to me.
Right.
And so that was inherent tension. And then, there's one guy I remember who's actually a very close friend now who was running sales in our London office.
Ah, yes.
And so he was using services to sell in a bunch of things. And we had some really interesting, this could be a whole show. Jeff, you tell me how you want to go here. We had some really interesting clients out of Germany that we were getting up and running at the time. And we were hiring up some services people in the UK and Europe to help service them. And so he kind of, can you still hear me, by the way?
I can, yes. I by the way, I did write down a note about, I have a note here. It's called Photoshop. I wonder if it's the same example.
Yeah, no, we should, or I thought it was PowerPoint, but we should come back to that. So I remember he sold something without consulting me.
Yes.
And just put the price on it that he needed to get the deal done. And in the big picture, it was the right thing to get the client in the door, but it put us in a awkward position in services because we were underwater from the start. Dates were unrealistic, and we were just going to make everybody unhappy. And one of my first trips to London, we had a lunch, and I was San Francisco based at the time. And I remember they took me to a Mexican restaurant in London, which was actually surprisingly good, but nevertheless, and we kind of hashed it out over lunch and had a real heart to heart, and he understood our position better. I understood his position better, and we just agreed to communicate better. And
right.
that then I wound up going to London for about 4 months to help grow the business there, be a face of professional services, and work on some burgeoning kind of OTT, TV stuff. And we wound up having a great rapport, and we were very effective together. And that relationship, developed well. And then he wound up moving to San Francisco years later, and we became, very good friends.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I totally forgotten about that whole UK experience.
Oh,
by the way, I look back upon my sort of experience in action sometimes when I was getting ready to talk to you, and I'm like, I feel like I was a teenager then. Like I was like, I don't know. I just like it was it was a little while back, but just sort of like the stuff I've learned and we've all learned from there. We were just kind of figuring out so much stuff along the way.
Yeah.
So on that note, and that sort of was a great sort of micro example of like a sort of a sales guy goes out and sells something, service is going to slow the deal down, and probably they know we're going to get upset anyway, so they'll just throw it in there and deal with it later. But then there were these other things. So this happens to a lot of people in these types of SaaS or product company positions, but the big customer, right? So we were always going for the grand slam of Brightcove, right? Like if we signed on one of these massive companies, it's a lot of streams, it's a lot of people watching video through our platform. And in my whole don't F with the revenue thing, this gets into it a little bit because we were, being asked to swallow, and I can think of like 3, like boom, boom, boom off the top of my head, where like we priced it out, like that's $1 million worth of services work. And they're like, great, you're going to charge $250 for that. I'm like, what? And like, and I don't know if, you're still around or there when this sort of thing happened, but like Chris Menard, our CFO, had basically said like, our profitable, professional services company will continue to be profitable in Q2 or our second, quarter of being public, and then suddenly it's like, you need to eat 750 in margin. And I'm like, well, how am I supposed to be? But that sort of just kept, I sort of think, happening. They're very strategic deals. And we have to do a lot of those things to win the business. The public company one, I don't want to get into too much. That was a very interesting situation. I would rather kind of want to talk about maybe a previous dial-up business customer that we had, or one that was very famous for that, but then had lots of other businesses that they would prefer people didn't know that they owned. And
yes,
and that was a very strategic deal for us at the time, where we just kind of got a lot of stuff done and did a lot of things, but didn't help out our margins at all. You were very instrumental in those discussions, so I wanted to turn it over to you on those.
Yeah, and I remember our partnership there as much as anything, where I was instrumental in getting something through the door and moving, and then we could not have framed it and got it set up and gotten the work streams running in any kind of fashion without your involvement there. I remember a lot of late hours with us trading SOWs and requirements docs back and forth and trying to get everything as detailed as possible. That's a really important thing to set expectations. But that was an interesting one, where you had internal people there trying to build their own success on this thing. You had pulling out years of internal plumbing that had been built. You had a company in the midst of a transition from one business to the next that never wound up really being that successful in that transition. And a company that had been the biggest of big in the industry, and a real sea change in terms of their role in the industry. And so you weren't dealing with the A players necessarily anymore, and a lot had changed. But I
do believe they still had $1 billion in revenue when they signed up as our customer, because they were still they still had that legacy thing. Which, as a quick pause on this conversation, I've said this over time and switched it to my East Coast elites, but that customer reminded me that what we think is cool in Boston and San Fran and New York is not necessarily the status for all the distance in between there, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say it's another reminder of the classic innovator's dilemma, which is you have the company, which is required reading, I think, in services or tech as a whole, but the Clayton Christensen book. But it is, I figure I should do that. Where it's not just us talking, maybe the audience.
Put some notes out.
What was that? Which now the jobs to be done is the new innovator's dilemma from him. But the classic there is the Polaroid, Kodak, Compaq, Dex, these companies that create an industry and then cannot turn away from an existing revenue stream in a significant enough way and devote enough energy and resources to the new business that potentially cannibalizes the existing business. And so you can be a Kodak that invents digital photography, but you can't turn away from the film business. And so that winds up eating you alive. And so I agree with you on the coastal elites adopting the new things, and there are other things that are still very important. At the same time as you're the business and you see where the industry is going, you got to be ahead.
Also very tempted to say, I know these books.
You should. You have seen The Trip, right? Or the trip to Italy, trip to Spain.
No.
It's on Netflix and you should watch it. So it's Steve Coogan, who's been in a bunch of movies, Night at the Museum, as well as maybe Philomena or whatever, and funny British comedian. His English stuff over there is the best. He does this talk show host show that's really good. I forget the name of it, but The Trip is him and this other great voice actor and comedian, and they get assigned by a newspaper to go do a roadside tour of eateries in the English countryside. And the whole shtick is them like talking like this, riffing on their lives and their careers. And the one guy being a cartoonish version of his egotistical self that's kind of made it in Hollywood. And the other guy being small town, like relegated to English media. And then, but they both do voices. And it starts off with like the famous one they do they've done 3 now. They did UK, then they did Italy and Spain. As they do Michael Caine. And they go back and forth doing like, no, Michael Caine starts here. No, you want to do the 60s Michael Caine. That's a little bit different than the other one. And they do a Connery.
Oh, fantastic.
Great. And then the latest one, they do a great Bowie. It was after he passed, and they were doing like, you could do Bowie in his, younger years, or Bowie in his later years.
Yeah. Which they did great on that show about the musicians, but I should probably stop.
Anyway,
we're in the middle of a great example of getting a project jammed.
So this client, you talk about the money, yet it was a little bit of a yellow flag in that they ordered pizza and salad for lunch, I remember, when we were on site, and they had to know the exact count of people and make sure they were ordering not too much, because even the lunch bills were getting accounted for with a high degree of scrutiny. And so there were some yellow flags in how this was going to be managed. And then
not only that, like when I went to their offices, it was like walking through an old mall that only a quarter of it's open now, right?
Yep.
Like, Claire's is still open, so
yeah. And so I think, out of that, I look back, and we did the best we could with that one, but I think the takeaways were, it was a company with expectations of being served as a large company, but with the budgets of a mid-sized company. Yet the amount of streams that it was potentially going to deliver was significant to our business. And we will be with them for a long time to come. Just an odd footnote is that company was a strategic investor in Brightcove's very first Series A.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And I remember going down to them right when we were first getting the company going. So we were hoping to work with them for a long time.
Yeah.
It was an interesting one. And then we obviously had some odd personnel issues as well.
Personnel issues is a great way to put it.
We grappled with in providing services to this client.
That is true. And on that note, I don't want to have legal run through the podcast to make sure I can talk about it, but I don't know if I ever told you this story, but
do we have to say more so that this is actually entertaining and people know?
Yeah, so I had, you never know who's going to be listening, but I had an employee that I had let go for personnel, for actual like work performance reasons.
Yes.
And then somebody from that customer reached out to me and said, hey, I just need this file. This person was about to email it to me. Can you do that? And when I opened up the laptop, I had seen some, at the time, AOL Instant Messenger or perhaps Skype conversations, transcripts that just made me bring the laptop over to legal and say, I need you to tell me what to do about this. Just a funny note so there was some stuff going on between this person and the customer. So I'll leave it at that. But I do remember that Elizabeth, who pulled me aside before I had to let this person go and everything. It had been the first person I ever let go. I had certainly had to make the recommendation, but had not done the talk before. And she's like, I learned this from Rupert Murdoch, or was it right? And so let me know if you need any help. I've kind of seen it all. And then this whole series of events then happened over the weekend. And then I had to come back in on Monday and brief her on it. And she's like, yeah, I've never dealt with anything like that.
And Elizabeth had an armed guard contingent, starting satellite TV and the Middle East or Asia or something. And so she'd seen a lot, but not this.
Yeah. So, that just kind of gets into it. You have to deal with these things. You have to do swift movement is my sort of things from those. You have to put a team together, But if it's not working out, it's not like product. Well, it's like you have a delivery and you have timelines. You've got to pull people off. You've got to move people around, not like knee jerk, but pretty close to knee jerk, right? Like, I mean, you need, 3-month project, 3 weeks in, stuff goes sideways. You kind of have to make some quick decisions. So we had to do a little bit on that project. Prepared me for things to come. But, I think that's pretty good way of covering that one down. One other really interesting thing that I think we both worked very hard at was that we had to convince, and we'll talk about it for a little bit here, a sales team that not only are we not going to slow the deal down, but we are going to increase your commission check exponentially if you just let us get in and talk to the customer and set correct expectations and maybe find out a little bit more. And I will tell you, one of those persons who now runs, I think, sales for that group, who's the biggest, I think, we're talking about, was started off as a sort of inside salesperson. Oh, forget all the services guy. Now, like, lectures about like the value of bringing professional services into your deals. So
yeah, he was an early adopter of the importance of that. The other person I think of, and the history is fantastic with the client, was G. Gooder.
No, obviously it has to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
People always wonder, like, they said, why are you always at the top of the sales and President's Club and everything like that? And he's like, look at these deals, and he pulled them up, and he like, look at the services deals. It adds 300, 400, 500K to the deal.
Yeah, and he's one of the best sales guys I've ever worked with, because he knew the terrain, and he was smart about services. But I remember we were pitching Sun Microsystems at the time, pre Oracle, and he brought us in really early, and we worked together on the proposal. And it was what I look back whenever I want to call it a night. Yeah, and I'm working on a proposal, and I realized.
By the way, you had the added bonus of being in San Fran at the time.
I did. But and I could go down there and be present. But whenever, even when it's a West Coast client, like when I think about like, oh, the proposal's done enough, and I'll call it a night. Yeah, I think back to that Sun proposal, and that I said, you know what? I think we can take this a little bit further. And I brought images into the proposal, case studies, annotations as how it would work for them. I put in an extra 3-4 hours that night on the proposal, and we killed it.
Those always win the deal. Any of those little things. I was actually thinking of maybe starting a resource center of like, you need to do this to win deals, because you can crank out a price tag in an email, right? You can maybe drop it into a doc, or you could maybe actually I'm sorry, I'm going to get all blustery here, but like, take some pride in your job and want to win the deal.
Well, there's another, I want to finish Sun, and then I want to come back to this. But on the Sun side, they wound up being the ultimate referenceable customer. Oh, yeah. Not only did they adopt the full strategy, which was like a video portal, right? But they tracked leads in their funnel out to lead gen for new customers through the video flow, through their advertising, and they built a discipline of publishing on an ongoing basis and using what we built. And they had the right people in the right roles. Yep. And interestingly enough, one of those key people who drove that now is at Brightcove. Linda Crow. Big driver there. She's over at Brightcove now, and
I didn't realize that.
Super smart. And and she's and so then they wound up becoming this ultimate referenceable customer. Oracle acquired them, and Oracle inherited all of that and all the best practice, and became a great customer over there. And I think a lot of the stakeholders at both Sun and Oracle who embraced working with us at that close level became experts and spoke about video strategies, and were really at the forefront of kind of this enterprise marketing side. Yep. But coming back to the proposal thing, in my last few years, I also found the high fidelity proposal is as valuable sometimes as the low fidelity proposal. So sometimes when you put forward the fully baked glossy PDF,
Yep.
it conveys to people that it's a set in stone sort of thing. And the reaction they have is like a yes or no. But I have found sometimes like inviting people into a shared Google Doc
with some
to comment. Yep.
Yeah.
And or even like a bullet point email with some rough numbers that it's as well thought out as what would be in the PDF.
Yeah.
But it conveys to them like this is half formed, and we can work on this together as partners.
Yeah.
It's for certain clients, it's the right technique.
You know, it's funny because I feel that way as well, and we're both talking about our experiences in post product company. Able to suck off the teat a little bit because we have to kind of generate our own stuff. Like all of our deals and services were brought in by the sales guys who needed that extra 30% of our expertise to be able to like, hey, well, we want your platform, but we need to build this experience or we need to figure out X, Y, and Z. Whereas what we're talking about in that sort of second proposal is that like, we need to go win some business and we need to kind of worry about what our perception is like in the pricing. And I'm not saying there wasn't any of that when you're working for a product company, but like if you lose a deal as a product company in the services thing, it's like, oh, it's okay, you know, but like in the agency where you're kind of, you know, your own salesperson and, you know, banging the phones and doing all that other stuff, you know, you got to put extra thought into that.
Yes, absolutely. And you get that pattern recognition over time as to the sorts of people that you're engaged with who want to be either sold to or they want to partner, they want to be spoon-fed, they want to be part of the process. It's you know, much different types. As a buyer now at SoulCycle, where we're building a whole bunch of interesting things, now I see a range of different product professional services teams and how they sell and how they approach it. And I see that for certain companies, the all-in-one, we're going to kill them with services because it will give them the comfort that this is going to be done right. That resonates really strongly with a lot of stakeholders.
Absolutely.
You know, at the same time, and this could be a topic for another pod, perhaps. But I've seen now within the same category a different approach where companies are building the services into the sale, and there's no separate sale on the services side. And there is we talked about this a little bit past. There's a customer success team that is focused on getting them up and running successfully. And that's either a nominal like 10K extra charge or no extra charge. And you're not going to be penalized because they want you to get up and running and be successful with them.
Yeah, I actually, I'm going to touch on that in a different podcast. I had to do that at Virgin. And it really just depends on the level of service and what the service is. At Virgin, it was more of like an implementation team. It had to be attached, you know, created 3 different strata, you know, 10, 15, 25, whatever it is. But you had to sign up for one. And then you go through this 30, 60, 90 day sort of thing, and then you're out and you're done. Much different than the sort of like creating the custom experience and those types of things. So yeah, they're all different. And you know, in the personality types are different, the people that you hire, and then you get into, does the CSM do that? Do you have a separate implementation team? So I'm going to touch on that in a little teaser for one coming up in the future. So, but it's imperative. You need to do that in a SaaS-based world. You can't just say, here's your URL, get after it, unless it's like literally you need to drop these 3 lines of JavaScript into your, you know, into your homepage and you're good. So.
Yeah. But even then, like I'm going to drop 3 lines of JavaScript, and then I need to integrate it with my Salesforce implementation, or you know, or my
SAP system, my ERP.
I don't want to touch that project, or my analytics or whatever it is, and then it's like, so are you going to do that here? Do you have a partner you can refer me to who knows how to do that, or where are the docs? And suddenly there's an ecosystem around the thing.
Yeah, and that was a great model that was created at Brightcove before I got there, which is there was the analytics team, the ad team that you sort of mentioned in there. We had a bunch of topics to cover. We probably have time for only one more. Did you want to choose upon any one of those? I feel like packaged offerings could be, as you say, a separate conversation.
I think packaged offerings and teams and culture should be a separate conversation.
Yeah, no, well, let's do that. So
should we do a fun round?
Yeah, let's do the fun round.
Funniest services story?
And people who, what was the funniest what?
Funniest services story?
Oh, I thought we touched on a couple of them. There's so many of them. Oh my God.
I got 2 gems.
Okay. Well, I'm ready.
So we had some tension with this German customer.
Oh, Jesus. Sorry.
And so we went to Germany to make good and set the experience right.
Make good. Is that an East Coast?
Might be. Yeah. Make it good.
Yeah.
I think I heard that in a Sopranos episode. And so when we got there, we found out that the account manager was sleeping in the office of the main stakeholder at the client.
Totally forgot about this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The client
that's not normal. Sorry.
Not normal, and it was because of the amount of work that was getting done.
Absolutely.
It probably would have been better to set up the tension with the client first and then come to the story. But we could do that. But the funny part, we have this big meeting set up where we're going to make it good with the client. And there was a lot of tension for a lot of reasons, both internally and externally. And the narrative is completely flipped around. Do we have time for me to start with the other side?
Yeah, fire away. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So the client, big German media company,
huge,
big revenue, super important to us. First big entree into Europe.
So the New York Times, size of the New York Times and bigger,
bigger, bigger, like New York Times plus Gannett. And then the funny one, I remember this biz dev guy sold them platinum support, which didn't exist.
No.
And at Brightcove at the time.
God bless the hustle.
God bless the hustle. And I bring that story up from time to time. Sometimes you got to make shit up on the fly.
Yep.
And to get the deal. So we scoped out a project. And we brought on 2 new people out of the European office to help get the project going at the time. One of them was a designer, one of them was a developer, and then the other one was, and he was going to build some integration, custom ad integration or something. And then the other one was kind of an account lead who was going to run the project in Europe. So they're moving forward with what they're doing, and we had check-ins every week, and the project lead in Europe said, "We're on it, we got it, yeah, we're on schedule." And then the week it's supposed to launch, where is it? It's like, what do you mean? I thought you guys were doing it there. Like, what are you talking about? And he flat out lied internally, and we were under the gun. I said, well, what has your guy who you hired, who you vouched for, what has he done? Well, he hasn't been able to get it up and running yet. So we burn a month. We had to take it on internally in the US team. And then the client says, well, I was also expecting this requirement that we did not deliver. and we said, well, no, it's not in the SOW. And he says, well, it's in the proposal you put forward. And he sends us the proposal back. And he wound up changing the content in the PowerPoint to say we had promised something that we didn't. And this is one of those things where he knew that we knew, we knew that, and we all knew, but he was using his power and the size to say, you can't call me a liar because I've got $100 million of business coming and over the years. And we found the original PowerPoint, did the compare, it was not there.
Yep.
So we had to make it right. CEO had to get involved, and then I had to go to Europe to fix this. So there's tension now with me and the project manager who blew it. There's tension with me and the client. We go over there. We're on the train going from Amsterdam to Cologne or Dusseldorf. And I meet up, and I've got the head of services, who's this older guy who had been in services, Lotus and other stuff, who had visions of this operating a different way. We're on the train, and the project manager guy goes at me for like what he wants in terms of his career and building up. And after he had completely crapped the bed on the project, our boss now, who's sitting there, is looking at us and will not intervene, non-confrontational. He's and he's looking at him. He's like, so where's my path upward? Where's this? And where's that? I'm like, well, you got to get some success, get some pelts on the wall successfully before you're looking at your path upward. Right. And then the head there of support services is looking at it like, I'm not getting involved with this. Yeah. So we go to get off the train. I'm too old for this shit. We're gonna meet the client for dinner. Yeah. We go to get off the train, and the older guy waits to let people get off on the train. He's being polite. In Germany, the trains run on time. So the doors are open for like 30 seconds. Doors close on him. I'm looking at him, and it's nothing to do. So fortunately, he went on to the next town from Dusseldorf, which was Cologne or vice versa. Mm-hmm. Got the next train, turned around. We go to the hotel, and we go to dinner. We go to one of these great local beer halls with the pork knuckle and the local beer and the whole deal. And then I'm now with all the tension and everyone who's pissed off at me for kind of holding our ground. The peacemaker, who was the guy who got stuck on the train in another city. We're at this dinner making amends and building the rapport back up. And it was awkward, but you often, in those settings when you get to be face to face, you can course correct and set things up.
That's a great lesson there.
And we did.
In that, and I stress to everybody I work with ever, is that you got to meet the people in person, right? Even if it's impossible, do a video conference or whatever. But every project has bumps, and they're a lot easier to navigate through when you've broken bread with them, right?
Very good job of extracting the moral of that story.
So you know what? I know we had some other stuff listed. I think we can touch on that, especially I really wanted to chat about Patriot Season 2 because it took a dramatically different time.
I have not watched it.
Oh, you haven't watched it. You gotta watch it. We'll talk about it.
That was my business travel show, and I watched it going back and forth at your recommendation, Season 1, which is funny because a lot of Season 1 is business travel associated. Yeah. And so it's just funny to be in that world. And so for better or worse, I would say I haven't been doing cross-country trips.
Yeah. Well, next time you get sick, because I usually call these as when I'm sick, right?
Yes.
Dial it up, file through it. It's an interesting result. I won't give you too much on that. I want to touch on Gronk. Yes, my heart's broken, but the guy was too banged up. I mean, he just couldn't. Yeah.
For a guy who portrays himself as a meathead party boy, I'm reading these stories now. He saved his entire $54 million contract, didn't spend a dime of it, lived off of endorsements, lived this frugal life wearing jeans from high school. Yeah. And now he's like, I'm set for life. I don't have CTE yet that I know of. And I'm moving on. I give him credit.
You'll probably see him on Shark Tank in 5 years. But so, and you had wrote Sixers versus Celts, which, I'm assuming because the Sixers actually beat the Celtics one time, but I think it was Terry Rozier on the Celtics made a comment, or maybe it was Morris, basically it was like, yeah, I know it was a big win for them, but I thought confetti was going to pop out of the ceiling after they won.
Yeah. He could have just shortened it all and said Tatum.
Oh, yeah. Well, Fultz, I mean, my God. But
that is one of the most bizarre stories, right? And I mean, I guess step back on the Sixers and say, trust the process, get as many draft picks. A bunch of them are going to bust. and then you're going to get a transcendent player or two out of it, fill the rest with free agents, and then you're a contender. And that's where they are. And it's just a shame Okafor and Fultz panned out as badly as they did, right? One of them turning into a role player would have been nice, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point.
Yeah.
So, Eric, thank you so much for being my first guest. I'm going to get this up and live as soon as I can, which hopefully tonight. And we definitely have enough stuff, I think, to cover for the next one, and maybe grab some questions along the way. So appreciate it. Any final thoughts or anything, or are we good?
No, I think this is a great topic that is much needed. I think I'm excited to see kind of this dialogue be, perhaps like something that gels this conversation around the industry.
Yeah,
so
I feel like whenever I hear people talking, it doesn't go as in depth, right? So I didn't want to do the whole tell me about your 5 years of Comcast. No, let's get into this, and let's get that out of the way. Let's talk about some actual situational stuff, right? Because people might have just gotten a department handed over to them, or maybe as a senior leader or operator, but maybe also there's somebody who's being asked to step up, and it's just not out there for the day-to-day. Like PS Village is not working anymore. And,
right.
I mean, I just don't see a resource out there. So, hopefully people get some value out of it and learn some lessons. So it's been great talking.
Are we recording now, or are we
are recording? I'm going to stop in a second. But no, those are my thoughts on it. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And hope you'll have me back again.
All right.